Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, live in the Bourbon Life Studios tonight's my good friend, my buddy, my pal, my my Irish whiskey drinking buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing tonight, man?
Good. Soon to be Irish whiskey drinking buddy.
That's exactly right,
We're
man.
not
I'm
quite
kind of
there yet.
Giving a little bit away there, right?
A little bit. Yeah, I'm doing great, Mark. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. It's only Monday. We're recording on a Monday this week. It's been a busy week so far, but it's been great. I think I'd rather be busy than to be sitting around doing nothing, So it's so far it's been a good week. The weather's looking great this week, Matt. You can start talking about the crocuses and the lilies.
I was going to bring that up. You took the words right out of my mouth. It's just about that time of season when I get to start talking about the crocuses,
That's
tulips,
right.
and
Everything's
the red
blooming,
buds. All of my favorite springtime things to talk about, but we're not quite there yet.
Not quite there, but we're close, man. I can see the buds on the trees, and we've even got flowers starting to pop out of the ground. I'm like, come on, it's February. Just relax. You got plenty of time. Take it easy. But yeah, beautiful day again here in Kentucky. A great show tonight, man. We're kind of we're going a different direction tonight. This is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to this because this is a topic I don't really know a whole lot about, man. So
that's right. We're kind of the outsiders tonight on the Bourbon.
We are.
Podcast.
Yeah. On our own podcast. It's kind of cool though. I really enjoy it. So Matt, with that said, well, of course I want to thank all our sponsors. We appreciate all their support. With that said though, Matt, you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. Let's get down to brass tacks here. We have the Master Distiller, Brian Nation of O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Brian, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt and Mark. It's great to be here. Great to get the opportunity to talk to you about our whiskeys.
Yeah. And our listeners could probably tell from that introduction, that first sentence there, that you're not originally from Minneapolis.
You got it in one. I've traveled a small distance. I've traveled from a place called Cork in Ireland, and go over here with my family in August. But I've been working with O'Shaughnessy Distilling since July 2020.
No, that's great. Well, I'll tell you what, Brian, before we jump into the conversation, this is kind of an interesting setup tonight. And I'm really looking forward to this because the product that we're going to be drinking at the very final end, this is the first product from O'Shaughnessy that you guys have put out. Is that correct? Or the first whiskey, is that correct?
It's It's Keeper's Heart Irish American whiskey.
Right. So we got Keeper's Heart, and that's going to be the final drink that we have tonight. But
yeah, we're kind of like Tarantinoing this a little bit, where we like show you the end and then rewind it to the start. So
it's like Pulp Fiction. We're going to start from the end and go back to the beginning, right? So
you don't have to do any dancing like Pulp Fiction. I'm okay.
Come on, nobody can see us. We don't record video, man. But come on, you can.
Yeah.
You got your hair all fixed up for us, Brian. So we're ready for you, man.
Video.
How disappointing! Damn it, nobody's gonna see his hair, but it looks good. I'm gonna tell all our listeners, Brian, your hair looks on point. It looks good tonight, man. So looking good. But what we're drinking at the end, the Keeper's Heart, the Irish American whiskey, that is your first whiskey released from O'Shaughnessy. It's comprised of 3 different whiskeys. So we're going to break it down. In each segment, we're going to drink a different component of that final whiskey. So in this first round, we are drinking what I have listed as the triple distilled grain Irish whiskey. But Brian, you want to tell everybody what that is and what that means?
So effectively, the first component that we're going to taste is Irish grain whiskey. And it's made from a mash bill of corn and malted barley. And it's distilled 3 times on column stills.
Okay.
And typically comes off a column still at about 188 proof. So it's quite high in strength, which means that it takes a lot of flavor out of the distillate, but it leaves some lovely butterscotch caramel notes in the whiskey itself. And that delivers a lovely, sweet delicateness that you associate with Irish grain whiskey.
Okay. So this is a corn and malted barley what can you tell what the percentages are on each of those grains or the
Yeah,
or the corn?
it would typically be about greater than 90% corn, and the remainder then would be malted barley. It's typically between 90 and 95% corn.
Okay, I got you. Okay, that's good. So then once you triple distill this, you get it down, and this is actually at 86 proof. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have actually reduced this this grain whiskey to the proof that actually Keeper's Heart Irish American whiskey is, so that you're comparing all of the components the whole way across.
Gotcha.
Typically, when in grain whiskey, when it comes off the still, as I said, at about 188 proof, it would be reduced down to about 140 proof,
Okay.
so that it actually goes for maturation then.
Okay, I got you. And then with this is aged in I think the notes I had said this is aged for over 4 years. Is that correct?
Yes, it's over 4 years. It's aged for over 4 years, and it's in refill American barrels. So that's another key difference between, we'll say, Irish whiskey and American whiskey, is that typically when you talk about your bourbons and your ryes, they're all matured in virgin American oak barrels. But the majority of casks and barrels used for maturing Irish whiskey would be refill American barrels. So they've already previously matured either bourbon or maybe rye, but they've already matured something before they come over to Ireland for maturation for Irish whiskey.
Okay, that makes sense. Matt, what do you pick up on this Irish grain whiskey?
There is the butterscotch and the caramel that you were talking about, Brian, but I also pick up something a little floral, like a little rose petal, or like just kind of a like fresh grass or fresh grain in it as well. Like really nice kind of floral, earthy nose to it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
That would be
Go ahead, Brian.
that would be typical of a grain whiskey, in that a grain whiskey tends to deliver some nice floral perfume notes as well. So what you're picking up there would be typical of what you'd get in a good grain whiskey.
Okay, that makes sense. I would describe it as almost like bright. It has almost a very bright aroma to it in terms of my thinking. Matt said floral, which, yeah, I mean, it's just, you smell it. You do get a hint of that butterscotch, like you said, but then there's just this nice crisp brightness to it that really comes through. So it's a very, very nice on the nose, and really easy to sniff out. And again, this is 86 proof, right? Yeah. So
yes, yeah.
Great. So Brian, now we've got the basis laid down for our first component to the Keeper's Heart. Let's talk about you. You've got a really interesting story. So can you tell our listeners a little bit, or a lot of bit, about who you are, kind of where you came from, your background, and how you got into whiskey?
Okay, well, to be honest with you, I got into whiskey by complete accident, which is always a great way when you're happy in a place that happened as an accident. Then that's always good. But for me, my background is I did chemical and process engineering in college, and when I left college, like any chemical and process engineer, your expectation was you'd end up in pharmaceutical plant or an oil refinery. I actually worked in both. And spent very short periods of time in each of them, but was never settled. I always felt that I wanted to do something different. I wanted a little bit, I suppose, of a broader exposure. And maybe I was just like any graduate engineer leaving college. I thought that I could rule the world almost as soon as I left. And the fact that wasn't happening in terms of the pharmaceutical or the oil refinery was giving me itchy feet. But an opportunity arose at a distillery in Cork called Middleton Distillery back in 1997, where I actually joined as an environmental engineer. And Middleton Distillery obviously is famous for brands of Jameson, Middleton, very rare, Spot Range, Redbreast, and Power. So really a reputable distillery. And effectively, I worked for them from 1997 up until 2020. And the last 7 years of which I was Master Distiller, I replaced the previous Master Distiller, Barry Crockett, in 2013, and worked as Master Distiller there until 2020. If somebody said to me in 2018 that I would be leaving that role, moving from Cork to Minneapolis to be involved in setting up a new distillery and a new whiskey brand, I would have told them you were off your game. Simply because I never left Ireland. I never left Cork. Never lived outside Cork in my life. And was very, very happy where I worked and everything like that, and very proud of everything that we achieved as a team over there. So it certainly wasn't on the radar, but that was before I met Patrick O'Shaughnessy from O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company. Patrick reached out to me back in November 2019 by LinkedIn. And I don't know what was going on that day, because over the years you'd get messages on LinkedIn and, you just kind of look at them and you leave them go by. But for some reason, something drew me to respond to Patrick's LinkedIn message. And I did. And my response to Patrick was, Patrick, I'm very happy where I am, not interested in actively looking for a job or anything like that. But look, sure, send me through some more information and maybe we can have a chat. And if there's anything I can do to help, then maybe I can give you a hand. So Patrick reached back out to me and we arranged a call and went on the call. And I always remember the night I was having the call, my wife was effectively saying, why are you taking this call? You're never going to leave Irish Distillers. You're married to Irish Distillers. What are you doing? You're busy enough. Like, why are you doing this? And I just kind of said, look, let's have a conversation and see. So I went on the conversation with Patrick, not expecting much, not even expecting the conversation to last that long. But we were about an hour and a half on the call. Patrick, when you get to meet him, is a really, really charismatic person. He's extremely passionate and focused. This wasn't a whim. This wasn't something that was just decided upon the day before. They had done a lot of research into what they were trying to achieve. So it was actually very, very interesting. And we did hit it off at the start. And we kind of built a relationship from that moment. And Patrick's last parting shot was, look, Brian, if I'm in Ireland in the next 3 months, I could be in Ireland in the next 3 months. Would you meet me? I said, Patrick, look, absolutely. I'd love to meet you, to have a chat. Look, I've no intention of leaving where I am. I'm very happy where I am. But if there's anything I can do to help that isn't in conflict with what I'm doing, then by all means, I'd be happy to meet you. Came off the phone, went down, was explaining to my wife. My wife's commentary again was, why are you doing this? Busy enough. And just as she was saying that to me, a text came through from Patrick saying, I'm actually going to be in Ireland in the next 3 days. I'm bringing my cousin Michael and my uncle Jerry. We'll meet you anywhere in Ireland. And my reaction was, Jesus, oh my God, right. This is actually happening very fast. So I kind of went back and said, yeah, okay, I'll meet you. And I'll meet you in Cork. So where else was I going to meet him? That's where I was from. So effectively then they arrived in a few days later. They invited my wife along for dinner. And what we went to was a dinner expecting to be, an hour and a half again. We had a childminder minding our kids for a few hours. 5.5 hours later, we were still sitting at the table, talking to Patrick, Michael, and Jerry, and effectively no conversation about distilling. It was really all about life itself, about what we wanted for our families, what was important to us. And there really was, and I know people talk about cliched connections and all of that, but this genuinely was a very, very strong connection from the outset. And I remember leaving, getting into the car to go home, and my wife said, if we'd no kids, I'd move to Minneapolis in the morning. How quickly the conversation changed, and it was all around family, and it was all around, wow, opportunity. And effectively, the story went from there. We went over, myself and my wife went over in January, New Year's Day of 2020, and met Patrick's wife, Kelly, met Patrick and met Michael, and took a look around Minneapolis, because we knew nothing about Minneapolis. We didn't know anything about St. Paul. So we looked around, places potentially where we would live, potentially where we would send our kids to school. And we spent 4 days there. And to be honest with you, from on the plane back, that after those 4 days, our mind was set that this was something we were willing to take an opportunity at, provided that the kids were not 100% against it or anything like that.
Right.
And I suppose, as they say, the rest is history,
Yeah. I mean, that's a great story, man. And it's so, and just so people understand, I mean, when you say you're the master distiller at Irish Distillers, I mean, that people that aren't in the Irish whiskey world, or the people that don't drink Irish whiskey and don't understand, that's huge. I mean, that's a huge brand. For, I guess, from a bourbon reference, that's kind of the equivalent of like a Buffalo Trace or a Heaven Hill or something, like one of the well-known brands. So like a Harlan Wheatley master distiller at Buffalo Trace, or Connor O'Driscoll down at Heaven Hill, or somebody like that, that would just say, okay, I've been here for 7 years as master distiller. I'm going to move to Minneapolis and help start a brand new brand. Yeah. It's a great story.
It is, and there's no doubt about it. Look, it was a big move. It wasn't an easy decision to make, because I was so happy where I was and had great friends, and was really proud of everything we achieved there as a team. But my mother always says, "What's for you won't go by you."
Oh,
and an opportunity arose that, I was probably it was probably an opportunity that arose that may not come across your path again. And you have an option at that stage. You either take it or you don't. Neither one is a wrong decision. But when you make the decision to do it, you go 110% for it, and you make absolutely the most of it, and you really enjoy every minute of it. And I have to say, since we have moved and since we have got here, it has just been fantastic, from I will say, the excitement of the role itself, but also to see my wife and my kids really enjoying a new life in America, meeting new friends, meeting new people, experiencing different things like the snow. We don't have snow like this in Ireland.
Right.
Like skiing, there's lots of different things that we're getting exposed to that we would never have been exposed to in Ireland. So it's fantastic. It's a great, as we describe it, it's a great adventure to be on, and we're really, really enjoying it.
Great. That's awesome. So Matt, let's jump back to this whiskey, because we're going to drink another one in this round. So let's finish in terms of the taste, the palate, and finish. What do you get on this Irish grain whiskey?
Well, I think I'm going to finish off what Brian was saying here about really, really enjoying it by saying I'm really, really enjoying it. It's got a really creamy taste, and I get a lot of cinnamon, like right up front, like a good, nice, flavorful cinnamon with it. And then it's also, I'm picking up like some orange peel and a little bit of marshmallow as well. I really, really enjoy it.
You tend to get some nice citrus around with grain whiskey, and particularly on the taste as well. That tends to come through. What I also love about a good grain whiskey is that it is quite delicate in texture. It's exceptionally smooth because of the triple distillation process, but that butterscotch caramel follows all the way through to the end. You've got the nice vanilla contribution from the refill American oak barrel, and it does linger. And I love showcasing grain whiskey, because sometimes it's like the underdog. It's like underrated. People look at grain whiskey as being the cheaper style of whiskey. It's made in bulk, can't be good. But if you've got a good quality grain whiskey, which we source from Great Northern Distillery, and their grain whiskey is fantastic, I have to say. And if you taste that whiskey, and if you do proper finishes on it, proper maturation wood program on it, you create a fantastic whiskey on its own. Not a minded to be a component in a whiskey; it's in an overall whiskey.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree, Matt. I'm really surprised, because I wasn't expecting much from it, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just thinking it's a component to a blended whiskey, so I just wasn't expecting the flavor profile, the drinkability, the creaminess, like you said, all those components that go into this individual whiskey itself. I'm really surprised. I really am.
I'd be plenty happy to drink this by itself.
Drink it by itself. I agree.
Yeah, just as it is.
And so, Brian, you said this was sourced from where? I'm sorry.
From Great Northern Distillery in Dundalk.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Great. So I tell you what, let's jump on to the next one that we're going to be drinking in this round. And this is the pot still whiskey. So Brian, can you tell us about this one?
Yeah. So the next component, again, this is sourced from Great Northern Distillery. This is a triple pot distilled whiskey. It's the quintessential way Irish whiskey has been made in years gone by. It's that mash bill of malted barley and unmalted barley. And it's typically a 50-50 split, 50% malted, 50% unmalted barley. And then it's distilled 3 times in copper pot stills. Now, when you nose this whiskey, you're immediately getting a step up in flavor intensity compared to the grain whiskey. And one of the reasons for that is that this whiskey has been distilled 3 times, as I said earlier, but on the third pot still, it comes off at 168 proof. So that drop in proof actually allows you to capture more congeners and more flavor within the distillate itself. And that's why now you're beginning to get that step up in flavor intensity. If you just go back and nose your grain whiskey as well, you'll see what I mean immediately. You're now on the pot still whiskey, you're getting some more spicy notes. You're getting what I like to describe as a herbal, earthy note as well coming through in it. You also have some fruits that, for me, they're orchard fruits, but they're cooked. They're cooked apples, they're cooked pears. And for me, I also get rhubarb. I actually get stewed rhubarb. Now, maybe I'm a bit biased in that because I love stewed rhubarb and custard. But effectively, I do tend to get that stewed rhubarb note. And again, it's matured for over 4 years in refill American barrels. And I think that the vanilla sweetness of the American barrel enhances that overall earthiness and fruitiness of the pot still itself.
Yeah, Matt, what are you picking up on the nose on that?
It's funny. I wrote down some notes here before we got to talking about it, and one of the things I wrote down was it has kind of an earthy, musty type aroma to it. Certainly not in a bad way.
Yeah.
But I pick up the herbal. I pick up like tea, some sort of a tea, like maybe a black tea of sorts. I pick up like clover and honey as well. There's a little sweetness and a little clover coming through with it.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, like when you talk about Irish whiskey, this is really one of the big key differences of Irish whiskey, we'll say, to Scotch whiskey, is the use of the unmalted barley and malted barley in a mash bill versus 100% malted barley. And the use of the unmalted barley, and hopefully you'll get it on the taste when you taste it, is that the unmalted barley imparts a creamy mouthfeel on the whiskey. It adds a little bit more texture to the whiskey on the taste. And this, when you think about it, in the 1800s, this was the biggest selling whiskey in the world. This Irish whiskey, this style of Irish whiskey, pot still Irish whiskey, was really, really the big seller. And only for a number of different, you can call them travesties or issues that occurred from the late 1800s into the 1900s, that really saw the demise of Irish whiskey. But what people should always remember is that Irish whiskey was the biggest selling whiskey worldwide up until the mid to late 1800s.
Yeah, well, I saw the commercial because he lost the barrel during a storm. It fell off the boat, so that's what.
Yeah,
that was the night. So now this one's also 86 proof, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, you said 8.
When this goes for maturation, this would be reduced to 126 proof, and then would be matured at 126 proof. And we've reduced it down again to 46 after the maturation, just to do the comparison of similar strengths across the components.
I gotcha. Okay, so you're throwing out some numbers here, and I know our listeners are primarily bourbon and rye listeners, and you're talking about coming off at 180 proof and going into the barrel at 126 plus and whatnot. And everybody in the bourbon world is thinking, wait a second, you can't come off the still at more than 160. You can't go into the barrel at more than 125. What's going on here? So that leads to the next question that I wanted to ask you, and this could carry over into the next segment as well. If it's a long answer, it's fine, Brian. But for me as well, because can you explain what really makes an Irish whiskey? What makes a whiskey an Irish whiskey, I guess is what I'm asking.
So effectively, there's a definition of what Irish whiskey is. And
Okay.
An Irish whiskey effectively needs to be brewed, fermented, distilled, and matured on the island of Ireland, and for a minimum of 3 years. It must be matured in wooden barrels, so you can use something other than oak. It does not have to be used it does not have to be a virgin American oak. It can be a reefer barrel as long as it's a wooden barrel. In terms of then the different types of Irish whiskey, the quintessential one is pot still whiskey. And that pot still whiskey, is, as I said earlier, is using that mash bill of malted barley and non-malted barley. The only real strictness in terms of strength that you can take it off the still at is anything above 94.8%, which is, what's that,
189.2.
189.6
Yeah.
is not whiskey. So that's the limit. Anything below that is effectively whiskey, or is effectively distilled spirit, which ultimately can become whiskey after the maturation period of 3 years.
Okay.
So unlike in the US, there's no restriction in terms of what you can mature it at, what proof you can mature it at, or what proof you can distill it off. Only that 189.6 proof is the limit. In terms of proof at maturation, it's really up to yourself. But typically for pot still whiskey, it's about 126, and for grain whiskey, it's about 140. That's typical, but different distilleries will have different types of decisions or rules. And the 3 years, the minimum of 3 years. So you cannot call it whiskey until it's 3 years and a day old.
Okay.
And then in terms of the different categories of pot still, malt, and grain whiskey, there are different types of rules that will apply to whether you can call a whiskey pot still, single pot still, whether you can call it malt whiskey, or whether you can call it grain whiskey. So there are definitions there.
Okay, that's good, because I was going to ask you that. You don't have to go into the whole detail of those, but I was going to ask you, because obviously the first one we drank, we called it the Irish grain whiskey. This one, we're referring to it as a pot still whiskey. So I was assuming that there is some actual legal distinction between those two types of whiskeys. So
yeah, well, not alone is there a distinction in terms of, we'll say, what process they're distilled on. So the grain whiskey is distilled on columns, and the pot still whiskey is distilled on pot stills. But there's also a limitation in terms of the mash bill as well. I think for grain whiskey, it cannot have more than 30% malted barley to call it grain whiskey. In terms of pot still, it has to have a minimum of 30% malted barley and 30% unmalted barley, and a maximum of 5%. I think it's 5%. Maybe it's either 3 or 5% of adjuncts. So you couldn't put 30. Currently, you can't put 30% rye with 30% malted barley and 35% unmalted barley or something like that. You can't do that. It has to be, it's typically a 50-50 or a 60-40, or if you want to put in 5% adjuncts, then you can put in 5% oats or 5% rye or whatever like that.
Okay. All right. That makes, Matt, you look perplexed over there, man.
I'm digesting all of it here.
You're taking it all in, man.
Yeah.
So Matt, let's talk about this, the pot whiskey, the pot still whiskey. What do you pick up in terms of the flavor on this one?
It's really colorful. Like I take a sip and it's just, there's a lot of flavor, as we were talking about going from the triple distilled grain whiskey to stepping up to this pot still whiskey. Brian, what you were saying, how there's just this magnitude of flavor coming through. It's definitely apparent. You're definitely right about that. It's got a really colorful palate to it, though. I get a lot of stewed apples and stewed pears, kind of that baked aroma to those. I'm also picking up like dry white grapes, like a wine grape on it as well. It comes through to me in that way. But again, really nice creamy mouthfeel that you were talking about, just like a nice coating and lingering on the tongue as well.
Yeah, and I think as well is that, what I love about this whiskey as well is that it's nicely distillate driven in terms of its maturation profile as well, so that on the finish you're getting a lot of cereal barley notes on the finish that are quite nice and tend to last into the finish for quite a while, And I like that about this grain or this pot still whiskey. I like that herbal, earthy nature being almost giving it a nod to it because of that whole barley cereal note at the end.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. You know what? I'm going to say that I probably like the Irish grain whiskey, the flavor profile of that one a little bit more than this. It's just, it's not a type of whiskey that I drink on a regular basis. So I think it would be something that I would have to probably more acquire a taste for this type of whiskey, versus the corn and corn and malted barley. That's getting there kind of like a bourbon. So, my palate's used to that. Right. So, so I think this is probably just from a lack of training in terms of my palate and what I'm used to drinking, Brian. So it is different. I'm not saying that I don't like it. I'm just saying it is totally different. And that's why when we were asked about doing this show, I was like, this could be really good for me to really broaden my horizons and it is. And this is exactly why I wanted to do it. Because I knew it would open.
I think it is great to get the opportunity to taste different styles of whiskey as well, because there's so many different styles of whiskey out there, and they all have different characteristics that, when you're not used to drinking that style, they're effectively foreign to somebody. It's what we find it's very interesting at our distillery tasting room. When we have visitors coming through and they do this, they get the opportunity to do the component tasting. It's very interesting to see the variety of people who prefer the grain versus the pot versus the rye component, because, people have different taste profiles. People will kind of navigate towards a different style and a different flavor. And that's what I love about this whiskey as well. And hopefully you get to see that in the overall blend as well, the whole versatility of taste and extra layering of flavor that it brings because of the components,
Yeah, this is really cool. I'm enjoying the way we're doing this and stepping through this. It'll be a lot of fun. So, Brian, I tell you what, we're at the end of round one here. Let's take a quick break, and we'll get a word from some of our sponsors, and we'll come back and we'll move on to the American Rye Whiskey, which is going to be component number 3. But we'll be back with more with Brian Nation, Master Distiller at O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company, in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
Spirits of French Lick crafts their spirits using only the finest agricultural product that has defined character, following their motto, respect the grain. They lead the way in representing the quality of the Hoosier artisan distilling process while paying tribute to its inseparable past. By implementing best practices from those early times, combined with modern touches, Spirits of French Lick has created a truly unique place in the industry. Spirits of French Lick products are distributed throughout Indiana, Kentucky, and Missouri, and can also be purchased online through Sealbox at sealbox.com. Visit spiritsofFrenchlick.com to learn more information, and make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. All right, everybody, welcome back for round session period 2, whatever you want to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast, or in this case, the Irish Whiskey Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark. With me, as always, is my good friend, Matt. Give me the stink eye there on the camera as I said that.
I know. Let me give you your sound. Wah, wah, wah.
Oh, yeah. Wah, wah. Wait, do I have the...
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. We appreciate you sticking around with us as we're venturing off the bourbon course here just a little bit tonight, where we are broadening our horizons and spreading our wings and experimenting in some different things, which is a lot of fun so far. Matt, what do you think?
I couldn't agree with you more. We are having a good time with the Master Distiller of O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Brian Nation. And in this round segment, period, session, whatever you want to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast, we are a little bit more back on native soil.
Yeah.
So what do we have poured up, Brian? Because this is something we understand a little bit more.
So this is the third component that goes into Keeper's Heart Irish American, and it's a rye whiskey. It's a rye whiskey that we sourced from MGP in Indiana. It's a 4-year-old rye, 95.5 mash bill, obviously matured in virgin American oak. So from the components that you've been tasting, you see up straight away a step up in color intensity because of the use of the virgin American oak.
Mhm.
I love this rye whiskey. I find it extremely vibrant. I have, in my mind, it's got so much going on in it. It has some beautiful spices of clove, of cinnamon, of nutmeg, and even some hints of cardamom. It also has some, what I describe as tropical fruits. It's kind of got melons, it's got peaches, and then it's got this lovely backbone of charred oak and freshly charred oak that really is keeping the whole lot together as far as I'm concerned.
Matt, you know what? Usually I throw it to you for tasting notes, man, but Brian's crushing it tonight with those tasting notes. So.
Yeah, I don't. It's not too much I can really add on to this. It's just,
what do you got to add to that, Matt? Now you know how I feel.
there's good peppercorn in there, a little bit of like green peppercorn on it, but this has just got that really great, like typical MGP, beautiful 95.5. I pick up like a little bit of graham cracker. There's something sweet on it as well, like a sweet caramelized honey or some sort of like a sweet toffee on it. But just kind of like everything we come to really enjoy out of this 95.5.
Yeah. I saw that on the notes that it was 95% rye. And I'm like, oh, I bet I know where that one came from. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Brian, is that somebody that did you guys have an established relationship with them, or was that just something that you guys in your search, knowing that you wanted to add? I'm assuming knowing that you wanted to add this rye, was that something you sought out, or was it just that's how it happened?
No, effectively, when we set out on this whole process, I suppose we gave ourselves kind of three objectives. Number one was, and it's a no-brainer, create a great tasting quality whiskey. Number two was that any component that goes into making the whiskey actually does play a role in delivering the overall flavor. You didn't want a component to be in there just as a filler. You actually wanted each component to play a part. And that's why I find the component tasting so effective and impactful, that people can actually see what each of the components deliver. And thirdly, then, was versatility, because if you look at the way the whiskey landscape has changed over the years and the way people now enjoy and experiment with whiskey more in cocktails, in long drinks, in highballs, compared to just drinking it neat and on the rocks, we wanted to ensure that any whiskey that we produce will be enjoyed neat on the rocks, but will also play in the space of cocktails. So versatility was very important. So I tasted a number, like putting this together was between 120 and 140 different iterations. Because back in Ireland, like we were looking at grain whiskey, we were looking at, grain whiskey, Irish grain whiskey, Irish pot still whiskey, Irish malt whiskey, even Irish peated malt whiskey. We were then looking at rye whiskey, bourbon whiskey, Tennessee whiskey, and trying to figure out which was the best types of blends that we could get to really showcase what we're trying to do here, which is bringing the best of Irish and American distilling traditions together. So in terms of identifying different types of whiskey, there was a number of different American whiskeys that we had tried, but I kept on coming back to this rye. I remember the first day I tasted it, and I remember going, wow, I really like this rye.
Yeah.
And I suppose my intention initially was that, our intention initially was that we would have ended up probably with our first release as being an Irish American with bourbon. But at the time, we probably didn't come across the right bourbon to suit what we wanted. So this rye really stood out all the time. So when we did our initial tastings in Ireland, because I was stuck in Ireland from July 2020 until January 2021. I wasn't allowed to travel because of the pandemic. So a lot of the iterations were done with Irish people, whittling down some of the iterations. And then in January 2021, I had the opportunity to bring some of these samples over to America. And bringing those samples over, was very important to me, because what I didn't want was Irish palates only deciding a whiskey that we were initially going to launch in America. You do need to make sure that this is going to be successful in the main market that you're going to launch in, albeit we have our sights set on making this an international brand. Our first market and very, very important market is going to be the US. We needed to make sure it was okay. And we were fortunate enough that at that stage, David Perkins from High West Distillery, who was the founder of High West Distillery,
Right.
had agreed to come on board with us as a liquid collaborator. And David is also now an investor in the business as well. I knew David for a number of years, but in fairness, when the O'Shaughnessy's were initially looking at potentially building a distillery, David was very gracious in offering some advice and support to them in terms of, what's the best way forward, when this was probably back in 2018, 2017, 2018. Mm-hmm. So he had started a conversation with them, and then the conversation kind of dwindled because the O'Shaughnessy's were gone away doing their design and all of that. And then when I came on board, we struck up another conversation with David. And, as I said, I know David for years. And as David said to me, he had unfinished business in the world of whiskey. And to think that David would come on board and collaborate with us was just fantastic. I think the guy is amazing in lots of ways, particularly around his innovation in around American whiskey and all of that. And I mean, he was the guy that put American whiskey and Scotch whiskey together in Campfire, and so he's done a lot of great innovative, and I would almost go as far as say groundbreaking innovations for American whiskey. So to have him on board with us is fantastic. So he was involved in some of the tastings that we did in finalizing the blend, and like for us, the rye whiskey was bringing so much to this whiskey overall. So that the relationship was then struck up as we needed to source more of the whiskey. I struck up a relationship with David Dykstra in MGP, an absolutely great guy to work with and deal with. And, we've just continued to work with him, because the thing you have to remember about this whiskey is our hero SKU, and it will continue to be a sourced whiskey all the way through. So we will be, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing at the distillery in a few minutes. But in terms of this brand and in terms of this SKU, this Irish American whiskey, this will continue to be sourced, our Irish whiskey from Great Northern and our rye whiskey from MGP.
That's good. I was going to ask you that question. I was going to put that when we actually were drinking the Keeper's Heart, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that was something that's been in the back of my mind, just in terms of, because I know you got the distillery. We'll talk about that here in a second. And you're obviously distilling your own distillate there. So, it's kind of the combination question of, when you start producing your own, will you continue to do Keeper's Heart? And also, if you continue, will it be your distillate, or will you continue to source it? So you kind of answered that question, which you answered both questions. So that's great.
Yeah. Like in terms of Keeper's Heart is our brand, and all of our other whiskeys will sit under the brand of Keeper's Heart. So what we distill at O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company will be under the Keeper's Heart brand, but they will be whiskeys on their own.
Okay, I got you now. Okay, so it won't be a different name of like a bourbon that's a different name, and a rye. Everything's going to be called Keeper's Heart.
Keeper's Heart brand. And we can talk about Keeper's Heart brand later on if you want.
Yeah, gotcha. So let's talk about the distillery. So obviously, these guys, they come over to Ireland, obviously targeting you, wanting you to be part of their brand. I mean, there had to obviously be something really there that made you say, "Yep, I'm going to leave my entire life and move to a new country, move across the pond, and build a brand." So, can you talk about the distillery and how these guys really were able to persuade you to do that?
I mean, we're coming up on the anniversary of when we dug ground, which was March 2020. Okay. March 17, St. Patrick's Day 2020 was when the first show went in the ground, which was lovely. Nice. In terms of there's a couple of reasons that I'm there, and there's a couple of reasons that we made a decision to come here. The first and foremost reason was the people that we met, and in terms of the relationship we built with them, and their honesty and integrity, and their inclusiveness of making sure that this was a right decision for both me, my wife, and my kids as well. that was very important to me, that anything that we were going to do to move had to be right for all of us. Because there's no two ways about it. When you've got, teenage kids, and when you've got a young boy who was, at the time, he was only 5,
Right.
it's a big life-changing decision. And when you're so close to your family as well, and you've always lived your life in Cork, you just don't do this on a whim. So if you ever talk to Michael and Patrick about it, they'll say that it was the longest discussion they've ever been involved in, because it started in November, and the final decision was made November 2019, and the final decision was made on I think the end of May 2020. So it was a long period of time. By the time it was all done and dusted. And in the middle of that, of course, we had a pandemic.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right.
Just
So
a
now
little
you're
pandemic.
about living, moving your family across to the other side of the world in the middle of a pandemic. I'll tell you a funny story, right? During this protracted discussion, there was probably days where I was coming home and saying the easy option is actually to stay where we are. We're not unhappy where we are. We're very happy with what we're doing. And I remember one day coming home to my wife and saying, like, there's a pandemic here. Like, maybe it's a sign, that we should stay. And my wife turned around and she goes, "Oh yeah, there's a world pandemic just to keep Bry Nation and Irish Distillers. Cop onto yourself. Get a late." She said that the world doesn't revolve around you and staying in your current job. This is an opportunity for all of us as a family. Let's grasp it with both hands and move. And she was dead right. But during that time, it was a nerve-wracking time, because you were going into the complete unknown, and it was a pandemic. So, as I said, glad I did it, and glad I made the decision. So, in terms then of what excited me about the distillery and about the opportunity, was we were building a beautiful distillery. It's 30,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet of, we'll say, distilling operations. And then we have 15,000 square feet of hospitality area, where you've got a number of different whiskey bars, cocktail lounge, potato bar, whiskey lounge, and some lovely areas to enjoy a few drinks and some food. So being involved in that design from the ground up was something that excited me. But also then being involved with growing a brand from the ground up, that was something that I really never done. It's something that's very challenging, but it's also something that's very exciting and very, if we were just doing the regular stuff, coming over and just doing regular whiskey, maybe I wouldn't have been as excited. But the fact that we're doing this whole Irishizing of American whiskey and Americanizing Irish whiskey, I think that has the opportunity to deliver a new taste profile to the whiskey world. And that excites me. That excites me because it allows us to do a lot more innovation around that. And the opportunity to, like, we're effectively operating in the distillery in Minneapolis using triple copper pots. So we take the Irish quintessential style of whiskey making, and we're making American single pot still at the moment, which is using that mash bill of malted barley and non-malted barley, but we're maturing it in virgin American oak barrels. So that's the kind of the Americanizing of an Irish style of whiskey.
Gotcha.
Then we're looking at rye whiskey, and we'll be producing this over the next couple of weeks. We'll actually be producing a triple pot distilled rye, which again is something that's unusual. That'll be new to market, and that's something that excites us because we feel it will bring a nice different flavor profile and this taste profile. So it's not just your regular rye. And we're also going to do a triple pot distilled bourbon as well. And we're planning will be that 100% triple pot distilled bourbon. And that will involve a grains in distillation in the wash still, which would be totally unusual. In Ireland, you wouldn't have grains in distillations in any pot still. It would normally be always just liquid only. So we've made a modification, or we're making a modification to our current wash still that will allow us to do a grains in distillation with external heating through a reboiler, which should prevent any major burn-on issues or any burn-on taint that could deliver over into the final distillate. So it's all exciting, and all of that because it's new, because it's an opportunity to do innovative styles. All of that really excited me as well to come across,
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that because you're with this brand, and one of the best known brands in the world, obviously, one of the best known distilleries in the world, and but it's something, I mean, there is maybe some room for innovation and experimentation there, but this is just ground level. I mean, this is totally something completely different. That has to be a huge level of excitement to know that not only can you be involved with this, but your fingers and hands will be all in the development and creation of everything that goes into this distillery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key part of it for me, is that, it's something new. It's an opportunity to really, spread your wings. It's also great from a learning experience and experience development from my own point of view. I mean, I'm big into the whole side of the education side of whiskey making. And, if you come to our facility, we put a lot of effort into the whole educational boards for people as they go through the tour. But for me personally as well, I always want to learn. I always want to treat every day as a school day where you can learn something new and learn something innovative or learn something different. And having the opportunity to come over and use to learn the expertise around making rye whiskey and bourbon whiskey, that's great for me as well. And I love that side of it as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And that keeps you young too, right? I mean, when you're learning new things, it keeps you fresh, it keeps you young, keeps you excited. I mean,
It does. It definitely does. And it's what makes, we're very fortunate. Like when you're able to wake up in the morning and be happy and look forward to going into doing a job, you're very, very fortunate. And I really thank my blessings every day that all through my career so far, I get up in the morning really looking forward to going in to do my job. And that's key. That's what it's all about. And if you have the opportunity to be able to do that, I think you're very, very lucky.
I would agree with that 100%. Definitely. So let's talk about the O'Shaughnessy's. So it's Patrick and it was Michael and Jerry. Is that right?
Yeah, so Michael and Patrick and Jerry would have been, they basically, their family are fourth generation Irish American. They
Okay.
came over from the Galway, Gort, and Limerick area, and they arrived initially in Massachusetts, and then they moved to Stillwater in Minneapolis. And effectively their family started out as bootmakers, and
Mhm.
that's where they let their roots in Minneapolis. And I suppose over the years, the family grew. Patrick describes Irish American families as like a bunny nation, where they on a regular basis. And as a result, the family have grown very, very big over the last number of years and the last a few generations. And they have this family gathering every couple of years. And there could be 200 or 300 people, over 300, actually between 200 and 300 people attend these family reunions. And they're quite big events. They have great fun. And at one of these events, they basically started talking about, what wouldn't it be great if we built our own whiskey brand and whiskey distillery. Now, this was probably started at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and after drinking probably a bit of Irish whiskey, as you can
Right,
imagine.
right.
Yeah.
But the following morning, the idea still resonated in their heads and in their minds. And being the people that they are, they went and they did their own research, saw Irish whiskey, saw the way Irish whiskey was growing and was one of the biggest, fastest growing international spirit categories for the last number of years, and also saw back through the history and ages that it was the biggest Irish whiskey category in the world back in the 1800s. So they set about the idea of bringing an Irish whiskey and looking at bringing the American whiskey tradition together. And that's then essentially when they started reaching out to me. And, you know, some people come up with ideas and they have an idea, but they're not passionate about the idea.
Mhm.
These people were so passionate. When myself and Una met, even like Patrick's wife Kelly, who's co-owner of the business, she was so passionate about it as well. I mean, our CEO Mike Duggan, who's ex Phillips and he's also ex Diageo, the passion that the team have and the belief that the team have about what we're doing here is just, it's second to none. Because, you know, we all believe that there's a great opportunity to create a different taste profile, a different uh, almost like a different category of whiskey that people need to transcend between. If you look at Irish whiskey drinkers don't tend to drink a lot of American whiskey because they think American whiskey is too robust or too bold. American whiskey drinkers don't tend to drink Irish whiskey because they think that Irish whiskey can be that little bit too soft and too mellow. Well, now what you have is we're taking the richness and the delicateness of Irish whiskey, and we're mixing it with and blending it with the boldness of American whiskey, and that whole taste profile is actually proving to be quite having a lot of people that are quite receptive to it. So of it is just, it's so exciting. Think about it. We're doing something that we love, and people are liking what we're doing. So, in some respects, we're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be. And the cool thing is that, I mean, you had this great career in a place where you had lived your entire life. So I think that's a testament to the O'Shaughnessy's, that they were able to talk to you and what you saw in them and getting to know them, and just being around them. Obviously, that speaks volumes about the type of people, type of family that they are, that you felt comfortable enough to bring your wife and your kids all the way over here and start this thing from scratch. I mean, I think it's an amazing story. It's pretty incredible. So
it is. And, as I said at the outset, number one reason was the people, and, their integrity, their honesty, their genuineness is, I've never come across people like them, to be honest with you. And we as a family feel very fortunate to have come across the O'Shaughnessy's, and we're really, really happy to be here and really grateful to have the opportunity to do this.
Yep, very nice. So Matt, let's jump back to the whiskey here. Let's talk about the MGP, or I guess now it's going to be Ross and Squibb as the new distillery name, since they were bought out or merged or whatever they did. So let's talk about this. So this is a 4-year-old, correct? Is that right, David? You said 4 years old?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so 86 proof, which I don't know, Matt, drinking MGP rye, I mean, I guess I probably had it at 90 proof, but I don't know that I've had it at 86. Not that it makes that big of a difference, but what do you think in terms of the palate and the finish on this one?
I like it. Gotta say I like it. I pick up immediately.
Matt, can I just say how surprised I am to hear that you like MGP rye?
Yeah, myself and the rest of the world.
Yeah, everybody else listening is like, wow, Matt likes rye whiskey. Go figure, right?
It's got a good palate with pickling spices on it. I'm picking up like cardamom. I'm picking up coriander. I'm picking up black pepper. Almost like almost a little brininess to it that I really enjoy. Then there's some sweetness coming through, that the sweetness of like sweet oak, that charred campfire sweetness. And then I'm getting a crispness, like a nice crisp apple with it as well on this particular MGP. It's a great representation of a 95.5 rye.
Yeah, it's absolutely delicious. Obviously, we're both big fans of the MGP rye, the 95.5. You're never going to find either one of us having a disappointing time drinking, even at 86 proof. When I say that, because I'm usually a higher proof drinker, but at 86 proof, it's the finish on this is. I was wondering, when I saw it at 86, I just wondered how it was going to finish. If it was the lower proof, if that would detract in any way from that. And I don't think it does. I mean, I think this finish just continues to go on. You get that nice peppercorny, that heat a little bit. It's not overwhelming, but you get that sweetness that Matt talked about as well. Matt, what do you think in terms of that finish for you? Does it linger like you expect, or is it kind of a surprise, or what?
I guess I had completely forgot that it was 86 proof. So
yeah,
I guess that speaks probably to the good side of things on it. It's got a nice long and lasting finish. It's not, like the 115 punch in the mouth, kick in the throat that we all kind of love, that goes down like hot fire, but you love it every minute of it. So it's good. It shows the versatility of it, but I had completely forgotten it was 86 proof.
Yep. There you go. So obviously big fan of this one. Between this one and the first one, Matt, I'm still, surprisingly, I could still go back to that first one. And I'm not saying I would necessarily pick it over the MGP rye, but daggone, it's so good.
I think this is just a cliffhanger for segment number 3.
There you go. That's right.
We're really liking what we've had so far.
Yeah, exactly right.
Put it all together.
So we're gonna see, when we put it all together, blend it all together into the new Keeper's Heart Irish American whiskey. So I think this is probably a good point for us to take a little break with Brian Nation. So everybody just sit tight. We'll be back with the third and final round with Brian Nation, the Master Distiller, O'Shaughnessy Distilling, in just a minute. Located just east of Lake Tahoe and the Sierra Nevada mountains, Frey Ranch Distillery was founded by fifth-generation Nevada farmers. Our grain-to-glass bourbon is made using a 4-grain mash bill, including a non-GMO corn, rye, wheat, and barley, all of which is 100% sustainably grown on the 1,500-acre Frey Ranch. And our commitment to excellence shows with a recent gold medal win at the 2020 Whiskies of the World and USA Spirits competitions. Find out more at www.freyranch.com.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody. Welcome back for the third and final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark. With me, as always, live in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise known as my basement, it's my good friend, my beanie-wearing buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing tonight, man?
Good, Mark. I'm not going to leave you. Are you kidding?
you're like Rick Astley, man. You're never going to let me down, are you, Matt?
No way. We've made it this far. We've got to stick around and see the exciting conclusion here with Brian Nation,
man.
The Master Distiller.
Bum, bum, bum.
That's right. We have baited this one.
That's right. We did a good job on that, Matt.
Yeah, because we've had the triple distilled grain Irish whiskey. We've had the triple distilled pot still whiskey. We've had the American Rye Whiskey. We have seen how the sausage is made, if you will. Now we get to go the final round here with Brian Nation, the Master Distiller of O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company. And we are, well, Brian, don't let me tell our listeners. Why don't you tell us what we've got poured up here for the final round?
So what we poured up here is effectively the blend of the 3 components that we spoke about tonight. And it's our first release from O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company. It's called Keeper's Heart Irish American Whiskey. So we've taken these components and have put them together to deliver the taste profile that, we are very happy with. And I just hope now that after the conversations and your enjoyment of the components, that you'll get to enjoy the actual the combination and the combined components in this Irish American whiskey.
We hope so as well. All right, so this is coming in at 86 proof, like the 3 components that we talked about. And again, so aged as the components were right at 4 years, maybe a little over 4 years, right?
4 years. And one of the things in terms of the proof of going for 86 as opposed to, a typical, we'll call it Irish whiskey, is typically in around 80 proof, especially a blend. But for us, we wanted to put it at 86 proof, particularly around the versatility side of things as well. Because if you're going to enjoy this whiskey in a cocktail, we want the Keeper's Heart whiskey to still be the hero of the cocktail, and having that additional proof allows the whiskey to still shine through, because sometimes you do see cocktails can actually take away the taste of the whiskey itself and you don't tend to appreciate the whiskey. Whereas we've found that this has worked so exceptionally well in an old-fashioned.
Gotcha.
It's our second biggest seller at the distillery after Keeper's Heart Neat. It just feels that the flavors associated with this Irish American whiskey really does lend itself to working very well in cocktails like old fashions and Manhattans and all that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I make a cocktail, because most of the time I'm going to drink my whiskey neat, but there are those moments where I like to experiment and get in. I love old fashions, but I have determined as much as I love bourbon, I'm just not that big of a bourbon fan in my cocktails because bourbon already has just so much sweetness to it. It seems like for me, unless it's a really super high rye content bourbon. But most of my cocktails I make, I'll do it with rye just because I want to be able to taste the whiskey. And a lot of times with the bourbon, I can't do that. So I can see what you're saying with this having the unique characteristics that it does, that it would be pronounced, that it would stand out, against the sweetness of some simple syrup or some flavorings or things like that go into an old fashioned or something else like that. I can see where this would definitely stick out. Matt, what are you getting at in terms of the nose? You got your nose down in that glass, man. You're picking up all the notes over there.
I know. I'm just that much closer to getting to try and taste this. So let's get to it. It's a rich, like right off the start, I picked up a smoky characteristic on the nose, which I was surprised about because when I really think about the smoky, it was from the rye that I was getting most of the char coming through. But that was the first thing that I really picked up. And then it lends way to fruit, getting like the tree fruit, maybe something like little apple, little orange or apricot, maybe something in there. Then there's like a sweetness, like I would describe as like a nougat or like a pulled taffy and like sweet cereal grain as well. I think the grain really shines through with this, but it comes through the sweetness. It doesn't have kind of that earthy, like tea or musty tone that we had in the pot still whiskey. There's a sweet cereal grain in it, and it's just a really complex, really perplexing nose. It's got a lot to think about.
There's a lot going on here, right?
Yeah,
I mean there really is, Matt. And the
certainly
funny thing
enjoyable.
Yeah, it is, and that's to me because I was curious because I knew the nose on the pot still. Again, and I'm not like saying, oh, it's not my favorite, but it's just it's something I'm not used to. And in this blend, I can pick it out a little bit, but the combination of the other flavors from that Irish grain whiskey and then from that rye that kick in together, and it just blends together. So you're picking out elements, like you said, of that kind of stewed fruit, the apples, the pear, that does kind of come through, but it's got that nice peppercorny spiciness from the rye. I can still pick out. It's got that graininess from the Irish grain whiskey, the sweetness that came through with that caramel, that butterscotch. All those little notes are popping through at different times. So it's a really nice, unique blend, but there's a lot of stuff going on with it.
Yeah, it's definitely a very layered whiskey. In terms of, for me, when I nose it, I immediately get somewhat like Matt was explaining in terms of I get that rye contribution. I then tend to get some of that herbal earthiness coming through, but it's almost for me like there's that combination of the tropical and the orchard fruits combined and almost being coated in baking spices. That's the way I would describe it. It also brings me back. You mentioned about a nougat taste. It reminds me of going to a sweet shop, and there was a sweet factory where I lived, and you walk into it and you get all of those hard boiled sweets that are being made, and you get that lovely aroma of the cloves, of the bullseyes, and all of that combination, the pear drops, the apple drops. For me, when I nose this whiskey, it's like being back there. And I love that. I love because I love when nosing a whiskey brings back a memory. I
Yeah.
also find as well that a whiskey like this, and look, guys, you've been tasting whiskey for a long time. You know that the amount of different congeners that are sitting in a whiskey as it heats up in a glass, it actually begins to change. And that's what makes sipping a whiskey, a complex whiskey, so good, is because each time you go back, you get different taste profiles and different flavors. And I think the layering associated with this combination really does lend itself to that. And you do tend to get surprises each time you go back when you're nosing the whiskey, and get different, almost pick out different constituents of the components coming to the fore of the whiskey at different times. And that's what I love about the complexity of it as well.
Yeah. So talking about the blending, Brian, because you talked about that a little bit earlier in terms of some of the work you did in Ireland, and you were able to come over. So can you really talk about the process, what went in terms, because you had so many different options available to you. You mentioned that earlier. So how did that process, how'd you whittle things down and really reach these final three? And then and like your team that you put together, how'd you guys work together to reach this final product you got?
Well, I suppose when it's interesting at the outset, and just to give you a kind of a taste in my mind of where my mind was at the start of this process, is I expected that it would be a 2-component whiskey, and that it would have been either a pot still and a rye, or a pot still and a bourbon, or a pot still and a Tennessee whiskey, something, but it would have been 2 components. What I found was that you actually, no matter what iterations you did in terms of proportions of pot still versus the American whiskey style, you couldn't get them to work as a balanced whiskey. Okay. And it was only with the introduction of a small bit of grain whiskey that actually allowed the 2 whiskeys to actually coexist and to deliver an overall complexity and balance of flavor that made it a whiskey that we're seeing now. So in terms of the process, the initial process would have been, in some of the iterations were just 2 whiskeys, there are 2 components. Mm-hmm. Then introduction of the different of grain whiskey, but we were also doing the iterations with malt, Irish malt whiskey and peated malt whiskey as well. In terms of how we whittled down, it was a lot of them that were whittled down initially by me, because after you put the blend together, you know that they're so far off balance that you wouldn't put them in front of a panel, to be honest with you.
Right.
And then we had a panel of tasters in Ireland that were willing to give up their time to come and sit around the table, and we go through a number of the iterations as well. We did that a couple of times, a good few times, to be honest. Because there's so many whiskeys, you're not going to be doing that all in one night. You're not going to do it in all one sitting, because, you become blinded very, very quickly. And then once we had it whittled down to a manageable number, I literally went over to the US with them and did exactly the same thing. What I found was that we came to 2 final whiskeys, 2 final iterations of the blend that you see now. And we decided that we would bring our whole team together and we would do a democratic vote of which whiskey would we choose. And we started it off by doing this component tasting. And for people that wouldn't have been extremely familiar with doing whiskey tastings, the actual walk through the component tasting gave them enough of an understanding and a background of the different components that was bringing to each whiskey, that they were able to make an informed decision of the whiskey that they preferred and why. And we found it so effective that's why we continue to do what we do, to continue to do it at the distillery. So it was almost like a number of phases in Ireland, coupled with then probably 1, 2, 3 more phases in the US, and then the final decision in April of 2021, where we made our final decision. Gotcha. And during that period, having David piping in and giving his wealth of knowledge to it as well was a great help,
Yeah. So did the O'Shaughnessy's, did they just say, Brian, this is your baby, run with it and come back to us when you got something done or close to it? Or did they want to be like, okay, every step of the way we want to taste and know what you're doing and have an idea of where we're headed?
They're if you come and visit our distillery, right, there is nothing in the distillery that they haven't been involved in making a decision, right?
Gotcha.
They have been amazing in terms of the bottle. I mean, we've this bottle, right?
Yep.
This bottle is there's a lovely design on the bottle. There's the neck of the bottle has an OG that's a nod to the OG on our pot still. The design of the bottle itself, the design of the label, the design of the actual label, everything has had a very strong input from the O'Shaughnessy's, and they've really taken ownership and given us I suppose, given the team the tools, to the best tools possible to work with, but have also been involved in the decision-making process the whole way through, which I think is fantastic. And we go to market, and when we're launching market, they're there to talk about the story, to talk about the passion that they have. And it really does lend to itself to the authenticity of everything that we're doing.
Sure.
And that's what I love about it as well,
Yeah. And I do love the label. You mentioned that. Of course, our listeners can't see the label, but it's a unique label. I love the design of it. Like a clock with two keys turned or crossed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So what's the and you got the Latin Fugit
Ora.
Aura. Yeah. So hours fly.
Hours flies. Yeah. So to talk a little bit about the whole brand name and the actual label itself, Keeper's Heart came from a number of different ideas and a number of different references, I suppose. Keepers, I'm your brother's keeper, I'm your sister's keeper, but it's also a nod to the barkeeper, who ultimately, for the success of any whiskey around the world, it's really a nod to the advocacy of a bartender, because ultimately these people are who are responsible for ultimately selling your whiskey to consumers and making, getting consumers interested in your whiskey. And so it's a real nod to them. Keep is, if you look at the top of the label, there's a castle at the 12 o'clock mark.
Right.
And there's a little drop of whiskey as the window. In a castle in Ireland, you keep your most prized possessions in the keep. We have our tasting room at our distillery is called the Keep, and that's where we do our tastings. So that's another part of it. Heart is looking at the quality of the distillate, the heart of the distillate, the center cut. That's not the quality, but it's also a nod to, it's the heart of everything that we're doing. Like we are opening our hearts for bringing people together around a glass of whiskey, enjoying it. The keys are us effectively opening our doors to bring people together, to enjoy moments and to create great moments together over a glass of whiskey. And if you consider what has gone on over the last 2 years, there's nothing more appropriate and nothing more important than spending time with people, because we've seen over the last 2 years being apart has been very, very difficult. So if ever there's a time for people to come together and make new friends and make new relationships, it's now, and that's what that's our whole philosophy behind O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company, is really about bringing people together, as bringing whiskey as well as bringing whiskey traditions together. And then Fugit Ora is actually the motto on the O'Shaughnessy family crest and coat of arms, and it means the hour flies. And again, time does travel fast, except over the last 2 years it's felt like an eternity, but make the most of time together and enjoy those moments together with people and friends. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. You want people to responsibly enjoy your product in settings where they can come together and have a bit of fun, build new relationships, build new friendships, and really, really make the most of the times that they have together.
That sounds exactly like what we're doing tonight.
Exactly. Yeah. Who'd have thought?
Yeah. Who would have thunk it, right?
Thought you'd have enjoyed a whiskey tasting with an Irish guy.
Hey, Brian, I'm just happy I can understand what you're saying. You know what I'm saying?
I've had to slow down since I came to Ireland, or since I came to America. I had to slow my talking down a bit, because when I came first, people were looking at me kind of going, what is he saying?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I can just imagine. So, but that's funny. Yeah. I mean, come from Ireland and straight to Minneapolis. It's like, okie dokie. Yeah. Just,
I also understood that there's some different words mean different things.
Yes.
In Ireland, when you say to someone, any crack, that means, is there any fun? What's happening? Anything going on? I asked that question to a few people in Minneapolis, and I got them very strict.
Oh man, yeah, that's not what you want to be asking in a metropolitan area like Minneapolis or any larger city. Oh my gosh, man!
You have to have the fun. I mean, we've just recently launched our ad campaign to to really show the personality behind our brand. And I would recommend you go online and look at it. But it really just goes to show, like we like to have a bit of fun in everything that we do. We don't take ourselves too seriously. But we are really professional in the whiskies that we're producing and in everything that we're doing from an innovation point of view. But we want to have a good bit of fun along the way as well.
Well, that's great. Speaking of online and videos and things to see, I did actually see the video of the drone that flew through the distillery. Holy shit. I mean,
yeah.
Whoever was flying that, I mean, I was just like, I would jump because I'm like, oh my God, it's like, but I want to tell
absolutely amazing. And we plan to do another version of that now that the distillery is fully open as well. And it's going to be really, really cool.
Yeah. Cause that's funny. Cause parts of the distillery were done. The column stills were in, the pot stills were in, chandeliers, lights, some things were in, but there's still drywall. There's mud on the walls, where they're still working, construction guys. But that drone is just cruising through the distillery. And not just cruising through the distillery. I mean, going like under and through between ladders and through doors and out windows. And whoever was flying that thing.
The guy who was flying it was sitting in a remote location and basically just almost like his eyes were effectively on the drone itself, and he was doing. It was it's an amazing talent.
Yeah, it is. I saw it several times today, just looking through the internet at different videos and things. And I was like, that was crazy. So I'm going to check out your other video too, your other promotional work.
Absolutely. Great one.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about other products, things that you guys are doing, because Keeper's Heart is your first. So obviously there's more. We talked about the Keeper's Heart brand. And everything's going to be released under that brand. So what else do you have? And this is kind of looking, I guess, forward to the future a little bit.
Yes.
What else you have?
So in terms of, we'll say, Keeper's Heart Irish American, we've actually just over the last few days launched our single barrel program, where we have actually done some finishes with Keeper's Heart at a higher proof, so at 110 proof instead of the 86 proof. Mm-hmm. And we have finished in rye barrels, we have finished in virgin American oak, and we finished in stout barrels and maple barrels. And the reception has been quite exciting, actually. And we've a number of off-premise areas in Minneapolis initially to start with that have actually they've been shipped today, actually, so should be on shelf before St. Patrick's Day, which is really, really exciting. What I love about the single barrel program is that we're giving people the opportunity to come in and work with us. And it's not very prescriptive from us to say, these are the only choices that you have, and this is the age that you have to take it. We want them to work with us so that they make the decision with us to make sure that it's the right taste profile for their consumers. So that's very exciting. And they have an opportunity in a couple of ways to do it. One is to come in and taste, finishing barrels coming at different times, and taste the difference between, say, a 1 month, a 3 month, and whatever. And then they can choose their time scale. They can also come and fill their own barrel and actually do a whole media piece on it themselves and do social media of them filling the barrel to show they're in at the start. So it's a nice opportunity. And we're also bringing additional barrel types in now, like Cabernet Sauvignon barrels, Sauternes barrels, PX, Madeira, some nice dessert wines, and some Zinfandel and Pinot Noir barrels. So we're doing a wide range of them, and we're really excited about it, because it is our philosophy here is to maintain the DNA of Keeper's Heart Irish American Whiskey, and to have an enhancement from the barrel without the barrel overtaking completely from the taste profile. So that's an exciting process that we're doing. We're also going to launch a new whiskey, which we will announce on St. Patrick's Day.
On the Bourbon Life Podcast, live tonight. No, just kidding.
We're really excited about that, and that should be on shelf by the end of March. We're really excited. We're really thrilled with how that's turning out, and that's exciting for us. And then obviously the other we call it the self-distilled whiskeys that we're putting together, like the American single pot still, the triple pot distilled rye, and the triple pot distilled bourbon. These will all come to market most likely in 3 years once the maturation period has taken place. I don't envisage us doing it any earlier than that because we just want to make sure that the quality is right. And even if the quality wasn't right after 3 years, we'd hold on to it. We're fortunate enough to be able to do that. And because of our hero SKUs and because of the laydown of stock that we have done for our hero SKUs, that we'll make sure we have a continuous supply with the relationship that we've built with Great Northern and also with MGP.
Okay. So like 3 questions just came out of all that. The first one is, as you move forward, because you're going to continue to source from Great Northern and from MGP. So will you continually blend to the same profile? Is that the hope? Is that Keeper's Heart, Irish American, will always taste, regardless of which blend, which bottle, which release, whatever you get? I mean, it's always going to have that same profile. Is that the goal?
That's the goal, and that's the intention. Obviously, when you're doing a release where you want to grow the numbers and you want to grow it across, like we expect to be in 25 states this year.
Oh, okay.
And our intention is to actually hopefully go to Ireland and Europe sometime next year. So like we have big plans for this. I mean, one of the beliefs we have is that we want O'Shaughnessy Distilling to put Minneapolis on the world whiskey map as well, which, something that people wouldn't think could happen. But we have great belief in the brand that we're putting together. And we really do want to put Minneapolis and Minnesota on the world whiskey map. So when you're doing something like that, consistency of flavor and taste profile is very important. So we want it to be a continuous, a consistent taste. It's one of the reasons why we have decided to stay with what we're doing in terms of sourcing, rather than to bring in our own rye or our own rye whiskey into it. Because if it's not broken, don't try to fix it.
Right. Because I was going to ask that question earlier about what your plans are as you if you're going to switch to your own distillate, but obviously you answered that question much earlier, which is great. So with this Keeper's Heart, just for my own clarification, you've got these 3 different expressions, you're blending them together. Now you're going to start finishing that Irish American Keeper's Heart whiskey in other barrels. So once you blend it, are you vatting this? Are you putting it just in tanks for right now, and then you'll take small portions out to put in these other barrels? Or, I mean, how's it being stored once you blend it all together?
So effectively at the moment is we blend it as we require it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we do small blends, and we basically do small blends and blend it as we require it.
Okay. All right.
So that is either you do it as a bottling run, or you do it as if you're doing it for finishing in a barrel.
Okay. All right. That makes, so you're not sitting there with like 150, 200, 300 barrels of Keeper's Heart that's been blended together already, and you're like, oh, what are we gonna do with all this?
No, in terms of like, our goal at the distillery will be that what I would love to do, and it's something that we're working towards, is that we actually have bigger size tanks in order to blend bigger volumes. Because when you're doing smaller volumes, it's it's every blend, you have to make sure your consistency is right. If you can do it over a bigger, it's a lot easier to keep it consistent. Sure. So there's a lot of effort in going into doing the smaller blends and keeping it consistent, which, we're very lucky with the team that we have, that we're, their attention to detail is great to make sure that we have that consistency. But it would always be greater if you've got bigger tanks and bigger volume that you blend in. I mean, this distillery, if you think about where we started, our distillery, in terms of even production, we were planning not to break 100,000 liters of pure alcohol in terms of production at the distillery for, the next 4 or 5 years. But actually, we're planning to produce about 200,000 liters, if not more, this year, which is great because of the interest, the excitement, and because of how well Keeper's Heart has been received, that our brand will be established. That will allow us to bring greater volumes of our own product onto market sooner in terms of after the 3 years maturation. So it's great for us. But as a result of that, we're already looking at expanding the distillery that has been open since August. But that's a nice problem to have.
That's a great problem to have.
If it would be worse if we built it too big and we couldn't maintain any production in it. So
yeah,
that's great.
So the third question that came out of your previous statement was, because you're laying down your own stuff there. So are you aging it there? Is it maturing in Minneapolis, Minnesota?
Yeah. So currently we are aging in Minneapolis. We have rented locations for a maturation. Our intention is to hopefully build our own rick houses as well, to make sure that we're in control of our own destiny, essentially. But that's probably a couple of years away. But at the moment, we're doing it in rented locations.
So are those temperature? I'm just curious, because I'm thinking Minneapolis, and when I think of Minneapolis, I think of miserable, like 3 feet of snow and like 0 degree weather. So
you're not too far wrong there.
Yeah. Okay. So
I was told before I moved over that it was always going to be sunny. No, it is always sunny, I have to say, but it's just that the temperatures are actually below freezing for the majority of 5 or 6 months. But in terms of the rick houses, yeah, we will do some level of temperature control in them.
Okay.
As otherwise you'd have two long periods of nothing happening. But we also have to balance it as well, in that you don't want it to be, too warm and you've got too much losses, and your maturation is actually nearly too fast. So we just want to balance that. We have the ability to control temperature.
Okay, that makes sense. So Matt, let's jump back to the Keeper's Heart Irish American whiskey. What do you think in terms of the palate and the finish on this?
The palate has a nice heat right up front, and I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out how I want to describe where the heat is. It's almost like the heat that you would get from a chili flake, but it doesn't have that taste. Like I'm not tasting chilies, but it has that nice warming effect that I get from that. Then it's got really nice zest and like citrus and apricot on it, but there's also a good amount of oak and that great baking spice. And then the heat picks up again on the finish. I get peppercorn coming through and a nice sweet oak at the tail end of it all.
Yeah, man, there's just a lot of things going on in terms of the palate and the finish on this one. And
yeah, really complex, really layered, like you were saying earlier, Brian. Like layered. I think layering would be the best verb I could use to describe here, or adjective.
That's good to hear. That's always positive.
No, it's excellent. Yeah. I'm over the moon enjoying it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is really good, Brian. There's no doubt about this. So just we're kind of at the end of round 3 here, but I wanted to ask you, but when you were thinking this over and mulling the decision, did your friends in Ireland, did they say you're crazy for thinking about even doing this, or did you have those discussions with friends or close advisors before you made the final choice?
I would have had the discussion with family members. Very hard to have the discussion with friends, because
sure,
it has to be kept very hush hush for a long time, in terms of because it took such a long time to make the final decision. I have to say that anybody that I mentioned it to were extremely supportive. Even in fairness, the people at Irish Distillers, when I eventually made my decision, as much as they would have preferred if I stayed, they were still very supportive and understood the opportunity that we had, and the opportunity for the family and everything like that was great. So I have to take my hat off to them in terms of how supportive they were in that respect. We'd be very close to our family and our parents, both my wife and myself. So my parents are in their 80s, and Una's parents would be in their 70s. So, it's a big decision to make, to move all the way across here when you're so close. But what's great about it is something that they would have never dreamt of doing before. They're actually coming over here. So Una's parents are coming in April, and my parents are coming in May, which is fantastic. So they're coming to see And we just told them, don't come in January, February, or March because it will be cold and snowy.
Yeah.
So we said April and May, definitely start thinking about it, because then probably June and July will be too hot for them. So they're coming. Right. So that's fantastic. And they have been extremely supportive as well. And, we've brothers and sisters that have been brilliant about it. And, everybody was supportive of the decision. Lots of people were surprised. Lots of people were shocked, but still very, very supportive. And we go back, like we went back at Christmas, we go back in the summer. So, all the relationships that we have in Ireland still stay alive. And, it's another place for our friends to come and visit. And we look forward to going back during the year as well to catch up with our friends. And so do my kids and stuff. So it's fantastic. We've got the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it, Brian. It sounds like it was a great decision. It sounds like you've made a wonderful choice for not just yourself, but for your family as well. And being part of building something that is off to a great start based on what we've tasted tonight. I would definitely say it's definitely a good start. So we talked a little bit about the future, talked about different things coming out. Anything else for the future for you, for the brand, for O'Shaughnessy Distilling that you want to mention or bring up?
I think, like St. Patrick's Day is going to be a big celebration for us. It's the anniversary. It's effectively the 2-year anniversary of when we dug ground effectively. So we're going to have a great party at the distillery on St. Patrick's Day, and we're looking forward to seeing as many people as possible come and visit us. So that's something that's going to be. It's an important day for our Irish heritage. It's an important day to celebrate our whiskies, and from point of view of that day, everybody wants to be Irish. So, we're really looking forward to it. So that's something. And I really think that anybody that gets the opportunity to come to Minneapolis, come and visit us, come and take a look at our distillery, come and taste our whiskey. We're already, we're launching in Illinois in the next week or two. We're already in Colorado, Kansas, South Dakota, Nebraska. As I said, we want to be in 25 states by the end of the year. So we're really excited, and I just urge anybody to give it a try. Try Keeper's Heart, have a taste of it, see what you think for yourselves, and let's hope you enjoy it, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Yeah, definitely. So where can people find more information about O'Shaughnessy and Keeper's Heart and your products?
So we have our own website, www.keepersheartwhiskey.com. And then we also have www.osdistilling.com. And there's all information about everything that we do in terms of our distillery, in terms of our hospitality, and obviously then in terms of our whiskeys as well.
All right. Yep. That sounds great. Well, before we close it out tonight, Matt, final thoughts on the Keeper's Heart Irish American whiskey.
I'm just going to say, don't just take our word for how much we like it. Go out and try it yourselves. There you go. This has really been a great show all around, from getting to try the 3 different components to getting them blended together to learning all about Irish whiskey coming off a regular still and a pot distill, column distill. This really has been a great time, Brian. Thank you so much for sitting down, talking us through your story, sharing with us the great spirits that you all have, and just spending time with us. We really appreciate the ability and the time we had getting to know you and hearing more about everything that you're doing and what O'Shaughnessy Distilling's up to.
Thanks a million, Matt. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really have enjoyed the last hour and, I don't know, is it an hour and a half or whatever?
I was going to say, I said before we started, about an hour, 15 minutes, but we're going on an hour and a half or more. Sorry about that, Brian.
It's fine, because I really enjoyed it. The time has flown, and that's always a good sign. When time flies, it means you're having fun.
There you go. That's right. And, because that was funny, because I saw the logo with the Fugit Aura, and I was like, Tempus Fugit, or Fugit Tempus, time flies. But yes, it is the truth. I agree with that. And I agree with Matt. I want to echo what he said. This has been a great show. And like I said, before we did this, before we booked the show, I was like, okay, Irish whiskey. I don't know anything about it, but I'm happy. I'm really happy that we decided to do this, because it's been a lot of fun. Brian, you're obviously, a great name for people that are outside of the bourbon and rye world, they know who you are. People in the bourbon world may not, be as familiar with your name, but it's been an honor to be able to sit down with you tonight and get to talk to you and hear your story and the O'Shaughnessy Distilling story as well. So it's been a lot of fun for me, and Matt obviously expressed that same sentiment. So we really appreciate you being with us tonight, and I've really just enjoyed it and enjoy the whiskey. It's really good. Can't wait to see what else you put out.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Mark. As I said, the pleasure was all mine. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So, keep up the podcast, because it is, if everybody has the same enjoyment that I have on it, then it's an absolutely magnificent podcast.
Well, thanks.
Guys,
we'll have to do video. We'll have to start getting into video, Brian. So, when you get your hair fixed up next time,
exactly.
we'll be.
Yeah. I can ruffle my hair back again.
All right. Well, I tell you what, everybody, thank you all for listening tonight. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all of our sponsors, everything they do for us. We appreciate all of our listeners. Thank you guys for tuning in each week and supporting us. We appreciate all your reviews on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. If you have a time, please leave that for us. If you want to reach out to us, please do so. You can reach us on Instagram by direct message at Bourbon Life, or on Facebook as well. We also have our Facebook group, the Bourbon Lifers. So feel free to join that on Facebook as well. We'd love to have you as part of the crew there. You can also email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for shows you'd like to see, we'd love to hear that. And we just appreciate you guys listening, whatever time of day, night, morning, whenever it is you're listening. We just appreciate you guys being out there. And with that said, I'm going to wrap it up. Send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.
Whether it's rye, sour mash Tennessee whiskey, or bourbon, Davidson Reserve has something delicious to offer any whiskey lover's palate. Pick up a bottle of one of our award-winning Davidson Reserve whiskeys from your local retailer today. Visit www.davidsonreserve.com for more information. And cheers to drinking local.